Ever tried to improve something,
Yeah.
like really work at it and thought you were doing great, only to find out you weren't even close?
Yeah, I've been there.
It's like when you think you've totally nailed parallel parking,
Right.
but then you see the look on your driving instructor's face.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in applied behavior analysis, we kind of take improvement seriously, and that's where this whole idea of behavioral assessment comes in. It's about, taking a guesswork out of progress.
Right.
And using like systematic observation and measurement to really see what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's like the difference between just eyeballing ingredients when you're baking and actually measuring cups and spoons.
Oh, good analogy.
In ABA, we want to be really precise and objective about the behaviors we're working with, and that means having like solid data to guide our decisions.
Exactly. We've got some really interesting excerpts from the book Behavior Analysis for Lasting Change to dive into today. And one story that really stood out to me was about this woman named Heather. She's trying to, improve her posture at work.
Right, like sitting up straight.
Yeah, sitting up straight, shoulders back, like the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And Heather's story is a perfect example of why we can't just rely on those subjective feelings. She thinks she's making amazing progress with her posture. But her supervisors' systematic observations, they paint a very different picture.
Right.
Sometimes we get so caught up in our own perceptions that we totally miss the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
But that's why this behavioral assessment piece is so crucial in ABA, right? It brings that objective lens. It's like a scientific detective.
That's a great way to think about it.
To help us see behavior for what it truly is.
Exactly.
So let's actually define behavioral assessment for our listeners.
Okay, so behavioral assessment is the systematic observation and measurement of behavior.
Okay.
We're not just like casually watching,
Right.
We're using these structured methods to gather really reliable information.
So it's not just about looking, it's about looking in a very specific way.
Yes, exactly. And this is critical in ABA because it helps us understand why behaviors are happening in the first place.
Okay.
Then we can develop like effective interventions based on that.
Right.
And then we can use the data to see if those interventions are actually working.
It's like a full circle process.
It is.
And the book really emphasizes this importance of good measurement.
Yes.
And it highlights 4 key qualities we should be looking for.
Okay, what are those?
Objective, reliable, sensitive, and valid.
Those are like the cornerstones of good data collection, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's break those down a little bit.
Okay, let's do it.
So an objective measure means it's free from personal bias, right?
Right.
Think of a ruler.
Okay.
A ruler measures length the same way, no matter who's using it.
Right, like it's that saying a fact is a fact.
Exactly.
No matter how you look at it.
So objectivity is all about keeping things neutral and unbiased.
Okay, so that's objective.
Yes.
What about reliable?
So a reliable measure is one that consistently produces similar results under the same conditions. Imagine a scale that gives you a different weight every time you step on it.
Frustrating.
Even though you haven't actually, gained or lost any weight.
Right, yeah.
That's the opposite of reliable.
Okay, yeah, so reliability is all about consistency.
Exactly.
Getting those same results time after time.
Precisely.
Okay, and then there's sensitive, right?
Yeah, so sensitive measures are those that can detect subtle changes in behavior you can think of, like a thermometer.
Okay.
A really sensitive thermometer will pick up on even small fluctuations in temperature.
Right.
But a less sensitive one might miss those subtle shifts.
So sensitive is kind of like having a superpowered microscope for behavior.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, so we've got objective, reliable, sensitive, and the last one is valid.
Right. So validity refers to whether a measure actually assesses what it claims to assess.
Okay.
For example, if we're trying to measure a student's reading comprehension, a valid measure would focus on their understanding of the text, not just their ability to read words aloud quickly.
Right. So it's about making sure we're measuring the right thing.
Yes, exactly.
Not getting sidetracked by something that's not directly related.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got objectivity for neutrality, reliability for consistency, sensitivity for detail, and validity for accuracy.
Yes.
Those are some pretty high standards for our data.
They are high standards, but they're important.
Yeah.
And the book also highlights this idea of treatment utility of assessment, which I think is really important.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means that our chosen measures should directly inform and guide the interventions that we develop.
Okay.
If a measure doesn't give us, actionable information that helps us create change, then it's just not useful.
It's like using a map with new roads or landmarks.
Exactly.
It might be interesting to look at, but it's not going to get you where you need to go.
Exactly.
So the measures we use should be practical and help us make good decisions about how to support our clients.
Exactly. So we need to think carefully about the measures that we choose.
Okay, so we've got our definitions down, but the book also talks about something called reactivity.
Yes, reactivity is really important to be aware of.
Okay, what exactly is reactivity and why is it something we need to be aware of in behavioral assessment?
Well, reactivity is the tendency for people to change their behavior just because they know they're being observed.
Oh, yeah.
It's a natural human response.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Like, think about how your driving changes when you see a police car in the rearview mirror.
Exactly. You suddenly become the most attentive driver on the road.
Right, exactly.
And in behavioral assessment, reactivity can be a challenge.
Okay.
Because we want to observe the person's typical behavior, not their on-stage performance.
Gotcha.
So how do we minimize reactivity and get a true picture of what's happening?
Yeah, how do we do that?
The book offers some really helpful strategies for that.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the tricks of the trade?
Well, one important strategy is allowing for an adaptation period.
Okay.
This means giving the person we're observing time to, adjust to the presence of an observer.
So it's just letting everyone get comfortable.
Exactly. It's like letting the bread dough rise before you bake it.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. We need to give things time to settle.
Okay, so that's one.
What else can we do? Another helpful technique is to use unobtrusive observation methods.
Okay.
This could involve observing from a distance.
Okay.
Or even using video recording.
Right.
The key is to be as discreet as possible.
Blend in with the background.
Exactly. Right. So the person being observed doesn't feel like they're constantly under a microscope.
Right, like those nature photographers who spend hours camouflaged in the wilderness.
Yes, that's a great analogy.
Just to get the perfect shot. Okay, so blend in, be discreet.
Right, and finally, we can also incorporate natural distractions into the environment.
Okay.
If the person's engrossed in an activity, they're less likely to be focused on the fact that they're being observed.
Right.
It's all about making that observation process as natural and seamless as possible.
Okay, so we've talked about the basics of observation, but how do we actually go about measuring the behavior we're interested in?
Yeah, that's the key question, right.
And the book talks about this idea of distinguishing between behavior that leaves a lasting product.
Okay.
Versus behavior that is fleeting.
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Because it helps us decide what type of measurement system to use.
Okay.
So imagine we want to track how many math problems a student completes.
Okay.
Well, we can simply count the finished problems, right?
Right, yeah.
That's because the completed problems are a lasting product of the behavior.
Yeah, it's we can see the results right there on paper.
Exactly.
But what about those fleeting behaviors?
Yeah.
Those actions that just happen in a flash and then they're gone?
Right.
How do you measure those?
Well, fleeting behaviors don't leave behind, a physical product, right?
Right.
So think about things like raising your hand, speaking in a soft voice, or even making eye contact. Those are all momentary actions.
Okay.
So to measure those, we have to observe them in real time.
Gotcha. So depending on the type of behavior, we need to choose a measurement system that can capture it accurately.
So we've established that measuring behavior accurately, it's kind of like having a finely tuned instrument, right? And just like any good craftsperson, we need the right tools for the job.
I like that, the right tools.
And the book, it does a great job of outlining a variety of those tools.
Okay.
Specific techniques for measuring behavior that we can choose from depending on what we're trying to understand.
Okay, I'm ready to expand my ABA toolbox.
All right, let's do it.
What's the first one? What's the first tool we should explore?
Let's start with event recording.
Event recording, okay.
Think of it as a tally system for behavior.
Okay.
We use it to count how many times a specific behavior occurs within a given time frame.
So if we're looking at how many times a student raises their hand in class, we'd use event recording.
Exactly. It's a really simple but effective method for behaviors that have a clear start and finish.
Okay.
And the book also points out that sometimes we need to look beyond just the raw count and consider the rate of the behavior.
The rate, okay, so what's the difference between the raw count, which is frequency, and rate?
Yeah, so rate takes the duration of the observation period into account.
Okay.
For example, let's say we're tracking how often a child calls out in class.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just saying that they called out 10 times doesn't
Right.
give us the full picture, right?
Right.
Because the ZEF-10 callouts happened in like a 30-minute period
Yeah.
versus a 3-hour period. That's a big difference.
That is a big difference.
So by calculating the rate,
Okay.
let's say 20 callouts per hour,
Okay.
we get a more precise understanding of how often that behavior is actually occurring.
Yeah, so rate gives us more context
It does.
and helps us see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's event recording. What's the next measurement tool in our toolbox?
Okay. Next up is duration recording.
Duration, okay.
This technique is all about measuring how long a behavior lasts.
So instead of counting occurrences, we're timing how long something goes on.
Precisely. Think about behaviors like tantrums
Okay.
on task behavior. Or even, how long someone engages in a preferred activity.
Right.
Duration recording helps us understand the length of those behaviors.
Right, and that can be crucial for developing interventions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like knowing the duration of a tantrum, for example,
Right.
could help us track progress in reducing its length over time.
Exactly.
Okay, what's next?
Let's talk about latency recording.
Latency recording, okay.
This one measures the time it takes for a behavior to start after a specific cue or instruction.
Oh.
So you're essentially measuring reaction time.
Yeah, so if a teacher asks a student to, get out their math book,
Yeah,
latency recording would measure how long it takes the student to actually start getting out the book
that's right.
after the instruction.
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
So this can be really useful in assessing things like compliance or following instructions.
Right, or even understanding processing speed, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if there's a consistent delay in responding, it might point to some underlying challenges.
Right, like attention or something.
Exactly. You're starting to think like a true behavior analyst.
Woohoo.
All right, now the last technique in this set is interresponse time,
Okay.
or IRT for short.
IRT, okay. That one sounds a little more complex.
Yeah, maybe a little.
What exactly does it measure?
So IRT measures the time between consecutive instances of a behavior.
Okay.
It's particularly helpful for behaviors that occur in like a repetitive or cyclical pattern.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, so think about behaviors like nail biting,
Okay.
fidgeting, or even speech disfluencies.
Okay.
Like saying, or like frequently.
Right.
These behaviors tend to happen in clusters.
Yeah.
And by measuring that time between those occurrences,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to see patterns
Okay.
and understand the rhythm of the behavior.
So it's not just about how often the behavior happens, but also about the spacing between those occurrences. I'm starting to see how all these different measurement techniques
Yeah.
provide unique pieces of information about behavior.
They do. They each give us a different lens to look through.
Okay.
And choosing the right technique
Yeah.
is kind of like selecting the perfect spice to enhance a dish.
Ooh, okay.
It all depends on what flavor you're going for.
Okay, I like that. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So we've got event recording for counting occurrences.
Yes.
Duration recording for measuring length. Latency recording for reaction time.
Right.
And IRT for understanding the time between behaviors.
Exactly.
That's quite a collection.
It is. We've got a good set of tools.
But what happens when we can't observe the behavior continuously?
Good question.
The book mentioned something called time sampling methods.
Yes, time sampling methods.
Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, so time sampling methods come in handy when continuous observation just isn't feasible or practical.
Okay.
Like, imagine you're trying to observe a child's play behavior on a busy playground. It'd be impossible to track every single action continuously, right?
Right, that would be way too much.
Yeah.
So how do time sampling methods help us with that?
Well, time sampling involves dividing the observation period into intervals
Okay.
and then recording whether the behavior occurred or did not occur during those intervals.
So instead of watching the behavior nonstop, we're checking in at certain intervals.
Exactly.
And noting whether it's happening at that moment.
Yeah, you got it. It's like taking snapshots of the behavior at specific moments in time.
Okay, that makes sense. So we talked about whole interval, partial interval, and momentary time sampling earlier.
Right.
Those are three main types of time sampling.
They are, yes.
Can you break down how each one works? Like, what are the differences?
Yeah, so let's start with whole interval recording.
Okay, whole interval.
So this one's the most stringent.
Okay.
To mark the behavior as occurring, it needs to happen for the entire duration of the interval.
So if we're observing, like, a child's on-task behavior during a 10-second interval,
Right.
they would only get credit if they stayed focused for the whole 10 seconds.
The entire time? Yep, you got it.
Wow, that's a high bar.
It is. It's like having perfect attendance.
Okay.
You have to be there for the whole class to get credit.
I see. Okay, so that's whole interval. What about partial interval?
Okay, so partial interval recording is more lenient.
Okay.
We only need to see the behavior occur at some point during the interval
Okay.
for it to be counted.
So it doesn't have to happen for the whole interval.
Not the whole time, no.
Just a portion of it.
Exactly.
So even if, like, the child was off task for 8 seconds, but then focused for the last 2 seconds,
Yep.
we'd still mark that as on task.
That's right. It's like getting partial credit for a test question.
Okay.
You didn't get it completely right,
Yep.
but you showed some understanding.
Okay, so whole interval is all or nothing,
Uh-huh.
and partial interval is about capturing any instance of the behavior. What about momentary time sampling?
Okay, so momentary time sampling focuses on whether the behavior is occurring at the very end of the interval.
Oh.
It's like taking a snapshot right at the buzzer.
Okay.
So if the interval ends and the child is doing the behavior at that precise moment, we mark it.
Okay, got it. Regardless of what they were doing during the rest of the interview.
Exactly. It's all about that final moment.
The final moment.
Think of it like a game of musical chairs.
Oh.
You only need to be in a chair when the music stops.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get the hang of these different time sampling methods.
Awesome.
But choosing the right one seems a little tricky.
Yeah, it can be, for sure.
Are there any guidelines for deciding which time sampling method is best for a particular situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that the book addresses head on.
Okay, good.
So the choice of time sampling method, it's not arbitrary.
Right.
It needs to align with our goals
Okay.
and the nature of the behavior we're observing.
Gotcha. Okay, so can you give me an example? Let's go back to Heather and her posture.
Okay, Heather's posture, yeah.
Which time sampling method would be most appropriate for tracking her progress?
So if our goal is to increase the amount of time Heather spends with good posture,
Okay.
then partial interval recording might be the most suitable approach.
Okay, and why is that?
Because it's more sensitive to brief occurrences of that desired behavior,
Gotcha.
even if she hasn't mastered it for the entire interval.
So it would give her credit for those moments of good posture.
Exactly.
Even if it's not the whole time.
Right. And that can be really motivating as she's working towards improvement.
What if our goal was to decrease a behavior, though?
Okay. So if we're trying to decrease a behavior,
Like, let's say Heather tapping her pen on the desk.
pen tapping, yeah,
Then which method would we use?
then whole interval recording might be a better choice.
Okay.
Because it sets a higher standard.
Right.
The behavior needs to be completely absent for the entire interval.
Gotcha. So it's a stricter criterion.
It is.
Okay. And what about momentary time sampling? When would we use that one?
So momentary time sampling is often the best option when resources are limited.
Okay.
And continuous observation just isn't feasible.
Okay.
It can also be useful for behaviors that are relatively brief
Okay.
and don't have a clear beginning and end.
Like what kind of behaviors?
So think about eye contact or on-task behavior.
Gotcha. Okay. So whole interval for decreasing, partial interval for increasing, and momentary for quick checks.
Yep.
Or when we're limited on resources.
Exactly.
That's a helpful framework.
It is.
But the book also mentions a potential downside to time sampling.
Uh-oh, what's that?
Possibility of errors.
Right. Time sampling methods aren't perfect.
Okay.
Because we're only taking those snapshots of the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
There's a chance we could overestimate or underestimate its true occurrence.
Okay, so let's talk about that. The book has a table that outlines the potential for errors. Right.
It does, yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways from that table?
So one important thing to note is that whole interval recording tends to underestimate the occurrence of the behavior.
Okay, and why is that?
Because we only count it if it happens for the entire interval.
Oh, right.
On the other hand, partial interval recording tends to overestimate.
And why is that one overestimating?
Because any instance of the behavior, however brief, gets counted.
Oh, okay, so there's a trade-off with each method.
There is.
What about momentary time sampling? Where does that one fall?
So momentary time sampling kind of falls somewhere in between whole interval and partial interval.
Okay.
In terms of accuracy.
Yep.
It's less prone to those extremes.
Okay.
But it still relies on those snapshots.
Yeah.
So there's always a possibility of missing some occurrences.
This is all making a lot of sense.
Good.
Choosing the right measurement system. It's like this delicate balancing act. It is.
We need to consider the type of behavior, our goals, the resources, the potential for errors.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It is. It's definitely more complex than I initially thought.
I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah. But the book does a great job of highlighting both the power and the limitations of the different techniques. The key takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely not. Every situation is unique.
We need to be thoughtful and intentional in our choices.
Yes, for sure.
Always striving for accuracy and reliability in our data.
That's what it's all about.
Well said. This has been a fascinating exploration.
It has.
Of the different ways we can measure behavior in ABA.
It's been fun.
But we're not done yet, right?
Not quite. We have one more important piece to cover.
Okay.
Inter-observer agreement.
Right, inter-observer agreement.
Or IOA for short.
IOA.
Can you remind me why that's so important in behavioral assessment?
Yeah, so it's all about making sure our data is reliable.
Yep.
Like imagine you're trying to bake a cake.
Okay.
And you ask two friends to measure the flour independently.
Gotcha.
Now, if they both come up with the same measurement, you can be pretty confident you've got the right amount.
Right. It's like that double-checking process.
Exactly. It gives us more confidence that the information's accurate.
Yeah.
And in behavioral assessment, IOA is crucial.
Okay.
Because we want to be sure our observations are objective.
Okay.
And not influenced by, personal biases or interpretations.
Gotcha.
It's like having a second set of eyes to verify what we're seeing.
Okay, so how does IOA actually work in practice?
So it involves having two independent observers, people who are trained on the target behavior and the measurement system.
Observe and record the same behavior at the same time.
So they're both watching the same thing at the same time. Okay, and then what?
And then we compare their data to see how much they agree.
So it's like a matching game?
Kind of, yeah.
We're looking for those perfect pairs of data?
Yeah, we're looking for agreement.
Okay, but how do we actually calculate IOA?
There are different methods.
Okay.
But the basic idea is to figure out the proportion of agreements between the two observers.
Gotcha.
The higher the agreement, the more confident we can be that the data is reliable.
Okay, that makes sense. So high IOA is a good thing.
It is a very good thing.
It means our data is consistent, and we can trust our observations.
Right.
But what happens if the observers start to, drift apart in their observations?
Ah, yes. Observer drift.
The book mentioned that.
It's a sneaky little phenomenon where observers, over time, they unintentionally change the way they apply the target behavior definition.
Right.
Or the measurement system.
So they're not doing it on purpose.
No, it's unintentional. It's like those two friends measuring flour suddenly deciding to use different measuring cups.
Right, without telling each other.
Exactly. And that would mess everything up.
Right, their measurements would be all off.
Exactly. And in behavioral assessment, observer drift can lead to inconsistencies in the data.
Okay.
And then that compromises our findings.
Yeah.
Like having a foundation that's slowly shifting.
Right.
It can undermine the whole structure.
Okay, so how do we prevent observer drift from happening?
Well, regular training.
Okay.
Refresher sessions on those target behavior definitions.
Right.
And frequent IOA checks.
Okay.
Those are all crucial strategies.
Okay.
It's an ongoing process of calibration and communication.
Right, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. Consistency is key.
Okay, so we got to keep those measuring cups consistent.
Yes.
And make sure everyone's using the same playbook.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to choosing the right measurement system.
Okay.
It seems like there's so much to consider.
There is.
The type of behavior, our goals, the resources, the potential for errors.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It can feel a little overwhelming.
It definitely can.
Yeah.
But I think that's also what makes behavioral assessment so fascinating and challenging.
Right, because it's not just about memorizing facts.
No, not at all.
Or following a set of rules.
Nope.
It's about, using our knowledge and judgment to choose the best approach for each situation.
Right. You have to be flexible and think critically.
So it's a blend of art and science.
It is, for sure.
That's what makes ABA professionals so valuable.
I agree.
We bring this unique understanding of behavior to the table.
Yes.
And we know how to measure it accurately and then use that data to make real change.
That's what it's all about.
Well said.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been so insightful.
It's been fun talking about this.
Yeah, I feel like I have a much deeper understanding now.
That's great to hear.
Of all the complexities of behavioral assessment.
It is complex, but it's so important.
Yeah.
And remember, It's a journey, not a destination.
Ooh, I like that.
There's always more to learn, new techniques to explore,
Yeah.
and ways to keep refining our skills as behavior analysts.
Always growing, always learning.
Exactly.
And for our listeners out there,
Yeah.
I encourage you to keep those questions coming.
Yes, please do.
Share your experiences, your challenges, your insights.
We love hearing from you.
Because together we
Yeah.
can continue to, elevate the practice of behavioral assessment
Absolutely.
and make a real difference in the lives of the people we serve.
That's what it's all about.
Well, that's a wrap on this deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.